In the first two practices of the spring, the Hurricanes have rolled out a starting five unit with Jalen Rivers, Javian Cohen, now that he's back after missing that first day, at center, Matt Lee, right guard, Inez Cooper, and Chris Washington for that first group. We're going to talk about the first group and the second group. There's four impact players that Miami has added to the offensive line in the offseason, two transfers in Cohen and Lee, and then the two highly regarded freshmen with Francis Mauinoa and Samson Okunlola on the second team, left and right tackles, respectively. David, let's start with. I know we're going to get into these the key guys that Miami has added in the offseason, but let's start with Jalen Rivers. We've primarily seen him at guard, primarily the starting left guard last year. He did play some tackle back in 2020 with his true freshman season, but they've got him at left tackle. What are your thoughts on Jalen and maybe his future projection? Do you think he could stay at tackle? Is that his best position? Just what do you make of Jalen right now?
I think he can stay at tackle. I'm not necessarily convinced he can stay at left tackle. I think he's maybe more of a natural fit at right tackle. But I think if you check the measurables on Jalen, I think he's got the size, length, and he's an athletic guy at that size. So I think he checks those boxes to be a college level tackle. If we're projecting to the NFL, yeah, he's probably ideally an inside guy. But I think, you know, first week of spring, they're essentially telling us Jalen is our best veteran tackle body right now. And I do think they're going to effort to get the five best on the field. So is Jalen going to stay there? I'm not willing to necessarily predict that, but I do think it's on the table and I think it's fine. I don't have an issue with it right now.
I'm curious how he's going to do throughout the spring. I hope he's going to be out there for all 15 practices. I like the move at left tackle. I like that he's going into year 4. He's a veteran guy. He understands it. I like powering up that left side with Cohen at left guard. I think Lee is definitely the center. I think Cohen and Lee are definitely cemented there. I think those will be the two guys. I guess they could rotate Cohen, but just being a starter at Alabama at that spot. But I like Jalen Rivers at left tackle, and I didn't know I would like that move, but the more I see it, the more I think about it. I like that veteran right there at left tackle, and it allows these two freshmen to kind of gradually move along slowly, and we'll see how things work out. And David, one of the reasons why I like Jalen at left tackle, I'm not convinced that Zion Nelson is going to be back to what we saw early on in his career. And I know there's a lot that still can happen with Zion. I just, with the setbacks he had last year, we're not seeing him out there in the spring. I doubt we see him at all during the spring. I just have a lot of reservations. So I feel like the staff can continue to move forward. And if they get Zion back, it's an added bonus. So I like that they're moving ahead and maybe counting on Zion. It isn't necessarily the best thing to do right now with this team.
I think that's all very fair. I think there's two questions Zion has to answer. And you touched on the first one, which is just health. Just are you healthy enough to be able to go at the level you were prior to the injury? And number two, I think there are some concerns. I don't know if concerns is the right word, but I do think for this staff, Zion has to show he kind of has that fire in the belly element, that competitiveness element that Mario Cristobal, Alex Mirabal want on the offensive line. And I think it's also worth mentioning too, Chris, right? And I don't know if we can read too much into this, but it's something. It's a morsel of what this staff thinks of Zion. Last year, right, he was coming off an injury that he sustained in the summer months leading up to the season, and he only played in 2 games. But in those 2 games, he did play on the right side. He was a right tackle in those games. So do they view him more as a right tackle anyways? I don't know that answer, quite frankly, but I do think it's an interesting thing to keep in mind. Like, even if Zion Nelson was able to play this spring, would he be playing right tackle anyways?
Yeah, we didn't get a chance to see that fully because, yeah, as you mentioned, he had that injury in July. I remember the photo. I remember Alex Mirabal, dismissing it. The coaches, Mario Cristobal, they didn't want to make it seem like it was a big deal, and it obviously was. 20 snaps against Southern Miss, 41 against Texas A&M, and that was it. That's all we saw of Zion last year. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes, and we're obviously a lot of people rooting for him. Good guy coming back, and it's tough to do. I just, I have reservations, and I think moving forward with Jalen, David, the two freshmen, everybody should be excited about him. It was great seeing him. It's been great seeing him out there. Really looking forward to seeing the guys get pads on with the offensive line. Certainly we'll be able to evaluate them more, and hopefully we're able to see as many reps as possible. And when I say Jalen at left tackle, that's not a knock on these two guys. I think very highly of them. I just think that the veteran leadership is key at that spot. Your thoughts on Francis and Sampson, because I wouldn't be surprised at all, because I've obviously seen Francis quite a bit, or I've seen him in high school. So I definitely have a high regard of him. I wouldn't be surprised to see him in that top 5 at some point during the upcoming season. But your thoughts on these two, and maybe you think maybe some keys for these guys to maybe earning that playing time to really earn themselves on that first unit, because that's obviously what both of them want to do.
Yeah, I mean, both guys, I mean, this is well known at this point, with them being 5-star recruits, but they're freaks. They look ready to go already at the college level. I think particularly Francis, from a body type perspective, looks ready to go. Sampson's right there too. He doesn't look out of place at the college level already as well. I am curious, you mentioned that first team offensive line, and I think the one that sticks out right now is right tackle, and that's Chris Washington, who's, to this point been a backup, hasn't really played much in games. And so I think, that's the spot where if Sampson or Francis is going to push their way into the top 5, that's the spot to kind of circle and keep an eye on. It's interesting, Chris, because coming into their college careers, I think the assumption was Francis is ahead of Sampson because he had been at IMG Academy, gotten that college level training, both in the weight program there and with the high level coaching they provide. And I think that was the case. But the vibe I get is since they've arrived, Sampson is really leveling up quickly in terms of adjusting to the technique needed at the college level. And he's picking things up quickly, and he's really closed the gap. And I don't even know if there is a gap there anymore. And honestly, coming into the spring, I was under the assumption that Sampson was slightly ahead of Francis. So I think that right tackle spot is up for grabs. Right now, Sampson's the left tackle with the second team, but I wouldn't be shocked if he gets the first opportunity with the first team at right tackle. So we'll see. And I think honestly too, there's a lot of different combinations they can go with in general with trying to find their top 5. But it's exciting, the body types that they've added here with those freshmen.
And I think Francis too, you have some position flexibility. If you really want to play him at guard, I think he could do that.
Yeah.
I think he could play him at guard or tackle. I think he could be,
Yeah.
I think he could excel at both. And as Cooper started the last 5 games as a true freshman at right guard, he's in there now. That's also another guy that's got to make sure he's continuing to get better. But I like the experience, and I feel like the coaches like the experience too. I feel like Inez was a guy. He was actually the 4th guy that they went to at right guard to start a game there, and then he held on to it the rest of the way. I think that's an interesting spot just to watch him and his development, if he can kind of take a leap there. And again, the offensive line has to get better from last season. Certainly with all of the offensive issues, I think you can point to every single position group that needs to be better, and especially the offensive line. But you've got a chance to make a real impact. And to me, if we're talking about all the newcomers and maybe the biggest improvement or what the biggest difference will be, honestly, David, and this might surprise some people, but I think Matt Lee at center, coming over from UCF, a veteran guy, veteran leadership. We've already heard positive things from Tyler Van Dyke about Matt's leadership, and he's really taken control. And I think just having that guy at center that can really take control of it. Now, he might, there's other guys maybe NFL draft wise considered more talented, but I think Matt Lee at the center, holding that spot down, I think he's a clear-cut starter going into next season. Jonathan Dennis did make a couple starts last year, but dealing with that recovery from the torn ACL, and I just think it's Matt Lee's without question. I think he could be that leader that they need, and obviously Javion Cohen with his experience at Alabama too.
Yeah, Matt Lee is a guy that is already establishing himself as an alpha on that offensive line. I know people inside the program feel like he has the potential to be a 10-year NFL pro. And so, he is highly, highly regarded. I think too, after this most recent practice here, practice number 2 for us, saw Matt Lee leave the facility, and, he looks the part in terms of just big frame for a center. And I was thinking, Chris, I can't remember a center at Miami that has as big of a frame as him, since we've been covering the program in a while. Brandon Linder comes to mind in terms of an NFL center, but he didn't really play center at Miami. So he's all of 6'4", 310, and he carries it well. So he is an NFL looking center. A lot of time college centers are a little sawed off and a little limited physically. He is not that. And I do think they expect him to be a difference maker, not only with his play on the field, but his leadership and accountability that he's going to provide to that offensive line.
Yeah, kind of going back, you mentioned it. So off the top of my head, Joel Rodriguez was kind of that standard center size. And then John Rochford got in there and he was smaller, but Anthony Wolfschlager was the guy that was a little bit taller. If I remember, he was a little bit taller, but certainly after that, it's been, Ja'Kai Clark, they're coming off of him. He was not the biggest center, obviously. So it's going to be interesting. And they want to get bigger. They want to get bigger. The coach says it, and I like this. He's saying things, and actually, what we're seeing on the field, it's starting to, formulate. It's not just a want. They're actually doing things to get bigger up front. They've got 15 offensive linemen on the spring roster. They're going to add 2 more after the spring and a couple of signees and Tommy Kinsler and Frankie Tinilau. So I'm excited to see what they do. They're obviously going to be behind, but they've got this group. Is there anybody that we haven't mentioned? There's obviously these top guys, but maybe a second unit guy that you're curious to see how he does. I think it's great seeing Ryan Rodriguez back out there dealing with injuries. So second team center and kind of just going through the second team. We've touched on the tackles, but at guard, it started out with Lawrence Seymour got that first team rep with Cohen out, and then he kind of moves down, and Logan Sangapalo was in there, as well, and he kind of shifts over on the right side. Antonio Tripp was in there, another freshman. So anyone on that second group, because they need depth, obviously, and they're definitely looking to get that.
I think if we're just talking the available guys, I think it's the freshmen that are worth bringing up that we already discussed, Sampson and Francis, but the guy who's injured, so not really answering your question, but a guy who's being held out as he recovers from an offseason procedure is Matthew McCoy. I know they're excited about his potential. He's still a developmental guy at this phase, but he's long. He's very athletic for his size, and I know they're high on him inside the program. And I think if he wasn't dealing with, coming back from an offseason deal, he'd probably be the first team right tackle right now. So I think he's a guy to mention. We talk about the second team. I'm curious, Chris, how sold are you that Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal are going to start one of these true freshmen this year? Because you look at the track record, there's Cam Robinson at Alabama, who Mario Cristobal coached there, Jonah Williams, Alabama, and then, of course, Penei Sewell at Oregon. 3 guys, all 3, I believe, were top 50 recruits coming out of high school. They all started. Cam and Penei were starting left tackles as true freshmen. Jonah Williams starting right tackle. He switched over later in his career, but it does seem like they give opportunities to guys. But with that being said, this group does have some veterans that they could slot in there instead.
It's interesting because I think it all goes down to Zion Wilson's availability, and because Coach Cristobal did say he feels like all the guys that are injured, this is what he said, that he feels like they're going to be ready for start the season. Now, the key will be, when is Zion ready? I believe last year, some of the guys, whenever they were ready, whenever they arrived on campus, it took them a while to get fully acclimated. So if Zion's not fully ready until July, is that enough time? Whereas all these other guys are getting key reps. So if he's not completely ready and doing everything at full speed in the offseason, I think they're not going to start him, if I were to guess. And I think at that point, you'll go with one of these freshmen, whoever essentially plays better. I could see that happening. On the flip side, if Zion does show that he's fully ready, but it's just hard to think he's going to be 100% just after spring ball ends, like at May. Is that when his timetable starts? I think he's just going to be behind, and I think these other guys certainly have opportunities. So in that sense, I think they'll go with it, and that's if I were to project at this point, because I can't speak about my reservations with Zion and then not fully come through with it. So yeah, I would be surprised if Zion's completely 100%. And so in that sense, I think they'll go with it. The only thing I would say, David, with that is last year, Miami did have some key freshmen, and it just took them some time to get these freshmen on the field, a different position group. So it wasn't like these guys started day one. Wesley Bassint was a guy we were wondering, why is he not out there more at linebacker? It just took some time. We touched on Cooper. He wasn't a high highly regarded guy, but it took him a while before they finally went to him. So there are some other examples. Jaleel Skinner, highly regarded tight end, but he was kind of fell down on the depth chart. We were seeing other guys that were older, maybe not as talented or not as talented, get more reps even as the season went on. So I think that's something to keep in mind. But clearly, both those two guys are really good, and I think they'll be fine. I would like to see them out there. I would like to see them start, get them playing time. I think this is a team that has to go with its youth.
I think they need to embrace the youth movement in a way, especially there, right? You got to send the message, especially that position group, because that's what Mario Cristobal is going to build this program out. Line of scrimmage players. Hey, you're a stud true freshman. We will play you. We will start you. I'm excited, Chris, in general, just what these type of offensive linemen can mean for this offensive system. I was trying to think like, okay, what's an example of a program that runs an air raidy type of offense that also has some freaks on the offensive line? And just off the top of my head, and look, Miami's a long ways to go from here, so I'm not suggesting we're going to see these type of results anytime soon. But the one that came to mind for me was Oklahoma when Lincoln Riley was there. And I went and looked, right? Since 2018, they've had 7 offensive linemen drafted off those teams. So look, Oklahoma, obviously, in addition to talented offensive linemen, they had ridiculous runs at quarterbacks, wide receivers, their running backs during this stretch that Lincoln was there, averaged 1,100 yards, rushing yards, their leading rusher per year. So, I think if you get all the pieces, and I would argue quarterback's the hardest piece to get. The second hardest is freak offensive linemen. So if you have offensive linemen that can win against those light boxes that air raid offenses are supposed to provide, I think it's going to be fun to watch this team run block and then obviously provide that pass protection that was missing for Tyler Van Dyke last year.
So great points on OU's offense. Great points on the offensive line in general. I like everybody to drop in the comments below. Let us know what we got right. What did we get wrong? Who are you most excited about? And also maybe who did we not talk nearly enough about? All right. Thanks for watching and take care.